If someone asked me what's the best Flutter package, I would respond, GetX. And that's my personal opinion, by the way. But as for the moment of recording of this video, GetX is the most liked Flutter package. On this video, I will show you guys why. So first things first, what is GetX? GetX is a mini framework inside of the Flutter framework and allows you to do things such as dependency injection, state management, route management, local storage, and so much more. All of that in a single package. And what's even better is that GetX does not depend on the context. So you can change screens, you can open snack bars, open dialogues from anywhere inside of your code. On this video, we are going to build two apps. One, a very simple one to get you familiar with the framework, which is going to be the counter app. And the second one is going to be a bit more complex or advanced. And we are going to integrate Firebase authentication and Cloud Firestore and things like that. I hope you guys are excited for this one, and let's get started. This video was sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is this amazing online learning community where you can have classes on a multitude of topics. I've been using Skillshare a lot lately to learn about video editing and animation, but that's not all, because on Skillshare you can learn on a very wide range of topics such as photography, design, productivity, and so much more, even coding. For example, you can take this class on Flutter, which was, by the way, the very first one I took in my life. The good news doesn't even stop there, because the first 1,000 people to sign up using the link in the description will get free access to Skillshare Premium. And after that, you are going to pay only $10 for the annual subscription. By signing up to Skillshare using the link in the description, you'll be supporting the channel. So thank you very much in advance. So guys, this is the default project you get when you create your Flutter app. And now we are going to integrate the GetX ecosystem into the project. The first thing to do here is to create a new folder, call it controllers. And create another folder, let's call it screens. Now use the link in the description to go to the GetX package URL, copy the dependency or the package, come back to your project, open pubspec.yaml, and we are going to add this dependency into our Flutter project. After doing that, we are going to create a new file, call it counter controller, that's going to keep track of the counter. And inside of the file, we are going to define our class counter controller, which extends GetX controller. In here, we are going to have our int controller. But since we want to know when the value of the variable changes, we are going to turn this variable into an observable. It sounds difficult, but it's very simple. Instead of having int here, we'll have var counter is equal 0.obs. OBS makes the integer an observable, right? And in here, we are going to write our method to increment our observable. Basically, we have here increment counter plus plus. Again, for every single variable or value that you want to keep track of its value, you have to turn that into an observable. Now let's go back to our main.dart, remove this widget here, import get, and we need to convert the material app into get material app. Basically, we do this so that we can change screens without using the build context of the app. We can change screen from anywhere inside of the code. Now let's create our home screen. So it's home.dart, and a second screen we are going to call other screen. in this case. And now for our home screen, this is going to be a stateless widget, so we need to import flutter material.dart, and we need to import get.dart as well. Call it home screen. Right here we want to return our scaffold, and as the body of the scaffold we are going to have a column. Main axis alignment of the column is going to be center, so that every single widget inside of the column will be centered. Now here we can have the children of our column, which is a list of widgets, obviously. Here let's have a text that displays the counter value. So now we have to register our controller before we use it. So we have here counter controller, which has to be a final. Okay, counter controller is going to be equal to get.put, and we use put to register our controllers, and inside of put we have to pass our class controller. Now here inside of our widget we can access the value of our counter by doing counter controller dot counter dot value. Now in here we can add a sized box to give it a bit of height. And finally, let's create a button that will allow us to change screens. Here, the other screen is going to be a stateless widget as well, and call it other screen. Again, we are doing this so that I can show to you guys how the process of changing screens without using context works. Here we are going to return a scaffold as well, and as the body of the scaffold we are going to have a column, and the same story here, we are going to have a text and then a button. Now the good thing is, after you have registered your controller, to access it you just have to do get.find, right? And GetX automatically will assign this variable to the controller you have registered, as long as they have the same type. And here we can simply do controller.counter.value. Let's make sure everything is centered. And again, we are going to create a button that will allow us to go back to our previous screen when we want. So let's just copy this and paste it here. Size the widget. And here, to go back, we just do get.back. This simple. We do not need to specify the context, and this is only possible if you use get material app. So don't forget to change material app with get material app. Now to go to that screen, we have to do get to, and here the screen name. Now change this here, and the home is going to be home screen. Now if you run the app, you are going to have something like this, which is not exactly how I expected it to look. No problem. Let's go back to our home screen and center the text and the button widgets. And now let's add a float action button to actually increment the value of our counter. Now, if you look at the app, we have here our float action button, but it doesn't update the UI. So to fix that, we have to remove the top level widget, and here we are going to return an object from GetX called obx, and this takes a method that has to return a widget, and the widget that we are going to return is the column, right? Hopefully it wasn't very complicated to understand, but basically you have to wrap everything inside of obx, and now when you click, the counter actually changes. And if you click on open, you can see that the value here on the other screen is updated as well. So this is basically it, and this is the basic example of using state management and route management using GetX. Now let's do something a bit more complex. This is the second app that we are going to build, and for this app I went ahead and created some screens, right? Starting template. Don't worry, because we do not have any type of backend related logic here. I just did create a bunch of screens so that we guys can save some time, right? And basically, as I told you before, this is part of another tutorial I'm creating where I'm cloning apps like Find My iPhone and all of that, right? On this video, we are going to do the Firebase authentication and integration of this app, and in the future we are going to do some other stuff, right? But basically here is what we have, and here is where you guys are going to start, right? So to get this starting template, it's very simple. Just go to the source code. Link will be in the description of the video. You just have to click on branches, and here just go ahead and click on starting template, right? And here you guys are going to find the code, the starting template code. You just have to click here to download the code and download the zip, right? And well, after you have downloaded the zip file, you are going to have something similar to this, and I'll just explain the project structure. I'll give a brief explanation of the project structure, right? And this is how I structure my projects. Now, if you guys need some in-depth video, maybe you can tell me that in the comment section. But basically we have the constants directory. Here we are going to store all of the apps constants, right? For example, the asset paths to the images, we are going to store them here, and this makes it very easy to access those inside of our application, right? And then we have the controllers, and here we have our GetX controllers defined, and I'll come back to this and show you guys what this will do. We have helpers, and this folder for now is empty, but we are going to create a file here. And we have models, right? And this is how we are going to model our database objects. For the user, I went ahead and created this. If you are not new to my videos, you've seen this so many times before, but basically here we have our user model, and we are going to instantiate our user object using this class here that only has the name parameter, email, and the ID. We have the device, right? Device model, because as I told you guys, the goal is to build a device tracker or device finder app. So here we have this model again, the ID, name, OS of the device, the token, and the location. But you don't have to worry about this. I'm just showing you guys, right? And here we have the screens, and how the screens are structured is a bit different, but super productive. Inside of the screens directory or folder, I have another directories. The screens directories, actually. Here we have the authentication screen and the home screen, because for the moment this is all we have. inside of our authentication screen, we have another directory called widgets, and these widgets are local to this screen here, are only going to be used in here. So we did not define them like here in the global widgets, we define them in here, right? Inside here, inside of this directory, you guys can see that we have login, registration, widget, and all of that, and then we have the auth.dart screen, which is the same for the home screen, and this is the structure that we are going to follow for all of the screens of the app. Here we have inside of the home screen, we have home.dart, and then in here we have the widgets that we use inside of the home screen. I'm not going to go very deep into this because it's very simple to understand. These are just Flutter widgets that we are going to reuse inside of our home screen, right? And then we have here our widgets, which is global, and in here we define any type of widgets that we are going to use in more than one screen. For example, we have here custom button, and obviously we are going to use buttons in multiple screens. We have here our loading, which is empty for now, and we have our custom text, right? So this is basically it. Going to the controllers, just to make sure you guys know what's going on. For each functionality or feature of the app, we are going to build a controller. For example, the authentication feature, we are going to have the authentication controller. For the maps, we are going to have the maps controller, and so on and so on. The app controller basically has some here we define things that are not very specific to one feature, but we are going to use throughout our app. For example, we want to show which device is active, which device is selected, and here we have active draggable widget. This may sound very difficult to understand, but it's not that difficult because let me go here. Here at the bottom we have these things, and we call these things draggable widgets. If you guys don't know, sorry for the mess here. Anyways, these things here are called draggable widgets, right? And when we click on this, we are changing the draggable widget, but the screen is the same. So basically this variable here keeps track of the draggable widget being displayed at the current moment. And don't worry about this rx. Doing this here, for example, if I want to define an object as an observable, as I told you guys before, observable is an object that will listen or watch when its values change, right? We have multiple ways of doing that. Previously we did it like this, where you have true.obs to make it an observable. You can define it like this. We have rx bool, right? And this is the same thing. Basically I can just remove this thing here and have it like var, and it's basically the same thing, right? When we are working with custom types, or it doesn't even have to be custom types, but we can define an object like this. We can make an object observable by doing rx, and then for the type, passing the type of that particular object. In our case here, we have our device model. We want to make our device model an observable, because every time we click on a device, let me show you guys what that means. For example, when I click here on iPhone 12, the active device now is iPhone 12. That's why we have here iPhone 12. If I go back and I click on Samsung S20, the active device is Samsung S20. So this basically keeps track of that, right? And you don't have to do it like this. I could just delete this and do var, and things are going to work with no problem. But I like to specify the type like this, right? So this is basically making an object an observable, right? And we have a couple of methods that we are going to call from our screen. For example, change displayed of widget, and this is where when we show our login widget or our registration widget at the beginning. We have here change active device to, and this is when we click on different devices. For example, when we click on on iPhone, we are changing the active device to iPhone. When you click on Android, we are changing that to Android, and change active draggable widget to basically this is the same thing. We are changing the draggable widget, right, to a new widget, right? Perfect. Sorry. Now let me show you how the auth controller works, which is very similar to that. Authentication controller, here is where we are going to have our user authentication logic. At the moment, we only have this. We have auth controller instance.getFind. And as you guys saw previously on our simple example, getFind will basically find an instance of our controller if our controller is already registered to the app using the get put. So instead of doing get find, every time we call of controller.instance, we are going to get an instance of this controller. That's why we did this like this. And when you come here to our constants, for example, we have here constants. What's happening here is that we have app controller is equal to of controller.instance. This will always return an instance of controller, and this is global, so you can use this anywhere inside of the app, which is good. You don't have to do that, it's not needed, it's just something I like to do. And is logged in. For now, we are just manually saying that the user is not logged in, so we have here false.obs, which makes this an observable, right? On ready, basically here is when we call this, when we first call this class, right? What's going to happen is we want this method to be called as well. So the first time we are going to call this class or try to access this class, this method is going to run, right? Set initial screen. And what this is going to do is, if the user is not logged in, we want to do get.auth all, and this is almost is equivalent to doing navigator.push replacement, right? You want to go to this screen without giving the user the ability to go back to a previous screen. That's why we use get.auth all, right? So if the user is not logged in, we want to open the authentication screen. If the user is logged in, we want to open the home screen. So hopefully this is not very complicated, but basically this is how it works. And the magic of using get material is that you can basically change screens without using the context of the app. You can change screens from your controllers, right? Just like this. And basically this is how this thing is going to work in here, right? Now what we are going to do, hopefully you guys understood this. We are going to connect this project to Firebase, and after the project is connected to Firebase, we are going to make it work. We are going to actually authenticate our users, right? Now if you have downloaded the project, connecting it to Firebase is very simple. Just go to firebase.com and create your project, give a name to your project, and remember that you can give any name that you want to. Now after your project is created, you'll see something like this. Click on authentication, get started, and enable email and password authentication, because this is what we are going to use for this project. And then go to Cloudflare Store, and you'll want to enable that as well using test mode. And finally, you will want to enable cloud functions. We are not going to use them on this video, but we are going to do that shortly, so you might as well enable that right now. To enable cloud functions, you'll need to insert some card details, but don't worry, because you are not going to be charged. You just have to do this to be able to use the service. Now after you have inserted your card details, you are basically good to go, and you can start using cloud functions in the project. Perfect. Now let's add our Android app to our project, and it's very simple as well. You just have to click on Android, and here we need our package name, and you'll get that from your Android manifest file .xml. Just have to copy the package name from here, and after that the process is super straightforward. You just have to follow the steps. That's why I'm not going to show that, because it's just super straightforward, right? And just in case you don't have the packages on your pubspec file, make sure you have all the Firebase packages: Firebase Core, Firebase Auth, and Firebase Firestore, right? But by default you'll get them here in this project. Now that we have our projects connected to Firebase, we are going to integrate Firebase authentication into this project here, right? Which is very simple actually. So here we have, if you open Firebase constants, we have here Firebase Firestore, we have auth for the authentication, and FCM for cloud messaging, right? But now for this tutorial, at least we are not going to work with the Firebase cloud messaging. We are only going to focus on this two, the Firestore and Firebase authentication, right? Good. Let's go to our auth controller, because for now we are only going to work with that, right? And here we need to define our Firebase user, but we want to make that an observable. So now the first thing that we want to do in here is instantiate our Firebase user. As you guys can see here, we are using Firebase auth, but we didn't import this file. That's why we're getting the error. Now what we want to do is we want to bind our Firebase authentication with our Firebase user. Basically, when the authentication changes, we want our Firebase user to change as well. So what this is going to do is, if we sign out, the value of Firebase user is going to be reset to null. If we sign in, the value of Firebase user is going to be equal to the current Firebase user. Now we want to set what's called event triggers here. And here our event trigger, the one we are going to use here, is called ever. And what this is going to do is, every single time something happened here based on our listeners, we want to have a callback function here. So what's happening here is we are listening to our Firebase user, and when our Firebase user changes, we want to do something here. So what we are doing here is, depending on the state of our Firebase user, we want to set the initial screen, for example. This is very useful in cases where, if the user is signed in, if the Firebase user is signed in, we want to go straight to the home screen. If the user is not signed in, we want to go to the authentication screen, and this is how you do that. If the Firebase user is not signed in, what happens is the Firebase user will be equal to null. So what we are saying here is, if Firebase user is null, basically meaning that the user is not signed in, go to the authentication screen. If the Firebase user is not null, go to the home screen. Now for our authentication, we have three main methods, which is so we have here the sign in method, the sign up, and sign out. To work with this, we need to have some text editing controllers here. So now we have defined our text editing controllers, which are name, email, and password. Here inside of our sign-in method, we will have, first we want to turn this method into asynchronous, and to sign in users using email is very simple. We just have to do await, sign in with email and password, and here we have email.text.trim and password.text.trim as well. Now here's the beauty of GetX as a package, because for example, if we have an error here, we can display a snack bar and we do not have to have access to the context of the application. We can just do something like this. So here we are going to display our snack bar. The title will say sign in failed, and we are telling the user to try again. You could display the error message here, but that's not very good to do. Instead, you can do here debug print error to string, right? The sign up method is very similar to this, so we can make this asynchronous and boom, paste it. But here, instead of sign in, we want to do create user with email and password, and the sign out method sign out just like that, right? Now here this is almost done, but since we want to work with Cloud Firestore as well, we still need to add some code. If you do not want to integrate Cloud Firestore into your project, you can just stop here and test everything out. Things are going to work perfectly, but we are going the extra mile. Here inside of our sign up, we are going to do this. Since our create user with email is going to return a user credential, we can call then and do something in here. Firestore collection, and for our case is the users collection because we want to create the user inside of Firestore. But to make our life easier, we can just come here to the top. We can define a string, and this is the users collection name. So in here we can have Firestore collection, users collection, the document ID that we're trying to create here, and the document ID is going to be the same as the user ID. And then we call set. The name of the user will be the ID and email. And here we have it. Now we have created our user inside of Firebase, Firestore. We can separate that. We can create a separate method to do that called create. Here we have it. We are using this private method to add our user to Firestore. Now let's create another private method to initialize our user model. So after creating the user model property, we can do here user model, so basically this is how we are going to initialize our user model. We have here we are accessing the Firebase document, and we are converting the document snapshot into a user model object. Now we just have to call this method. So that's it. After the sign in with email and password is complete, we want to initialize our user model, and the same thing here for our sign up. Actually, this is model. Now we are almost done with this, but I want to show you guys yet another thing that it's awesome about GetX. Here inside of helpers, we'll create this file called showloading.dart. Actually, the name of the file could have been better. And what's going to happen here is that we are going to show alert dialog. And for the content, we want to show a circular progress indicator. And finally, we do not want our dialog to be dismissible, so just and this is how we are going to dismiss. So what's going to happen here is we can come back here to our methods and just do show loading, call show loading just like that. So now we just have to go ahead and make this work, which is very simple. In here inside of our main, we do not have to do much because we already have registered our controllers here. Just have to call get put app controller, get put of controller, right at the very beginning of our app inside of the main, right? So basically we are going to initialize our Firebase app, and we're going to register our controllers here. Our home screen is our splash screen, which only has a circular progress indicator. What's left for us to do is very simple. Actually, we just have to go to home, to authentication, to the login screen, and by default we have here go to home, but we do not want to do that manually no more. We are going to do here something like of controller, because this variable is global dot sign in, and for the controllers here we are going to do of controller password, and the text, another text field controller is going to be of controller, not of controller, email. Finally, do the same thing for the registration screen. And finally, here inside of our home screen, we want to have the option to sign out. So here inside of our drawer, we will have Now we can finally test our app. Seems like the app works. Just don't forget to add okay, let's try it. And here we have it. Our user is authenticated. And if you go and check on Firebase, you'll see that the user is created as well. If we click on logout, we are logged out, right? If you don't want to see these things here, you can add a final method here called clear controllers, just to make sure the controllers will be cleared. If we go to Firebase, you will see that our users in fact were created. Here I have it. And that's basically it for this video, right? You can try to print the user model because we are getting the value of this thing as well, right? You can display that inside of the app if you wish to do so. If you guys enjoyed this one, thank you very much. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you guys didn't like, you can dislike it and let me know why. See you guys on the next one.